And we've hit on various aspects of this framework, right? In the first webinar, we talked about sort of discovering the operational context, some of the skills needed for that. In the second session, we looked at some ways to discover the ecological context. And we're not going to go over financial context in this webinar series. There's more info in the workbook. Today, we're really going to hang out here in pathfinding and how it relates to implementation. And so we are sort of getting all the way through this process in just 4 webinars. And then reminding again, we have that advanced copy of the workbook for everyone to dig in and find more. Next. That's the sort of content. And then again, we sort of pair the content with the skills that are helpful for actually doing this work. And so we had talked about some deep listening skills, ways to create trust and safety in a relationship that can sometimes be extremely personal and in some cases fraught. There are, of course, technical skills. And as we mentioned before, we're not addressing specific technical skills in this course. We have some other resources that we can provide. So in this one, we're going to focus on that facilitation aspect. And next week, we're really going to get into the networking. Next. All right. So we have spent however much time being out on the land together, getting to know each other through phone calls, Zoom meetings, texts, and we have the snapshot. We know what's going on. We know what the situation is financially, socially, ecologically. Where do we go from here? That's this phase of pathfinding. Next. So we often start by thinking about values and visions for Farm or Ranch. We want things that people are going towards together. If you have a bunch of different stakeholders, they all have different values, they all have different visions, it's going to be hard to pick a route. And so one crucial step is getting everyone on the same page of, even if there are a diversity of values and visions that people want to go, let's pick one for this plan, for this group. Let's pick this value and vision. And so value is sort of what's important in life. Like what are those tenets that people live by? And a vision is a statement of the future. What's it going to be like? Something that I really like to do, and we can do it really briefly, is, in 10 years, what do you want it to be like when you drive up your driveway to headquarters? What do you want to see on the sides of the road? What do you want to smell? What do you want, like, what does the air feel like? Is it warm? Is it cool? Are there shady spots? Catherine does a really beautiful visioning statement of, imagine you're a hummingbird flying across the land. Where is that hummingbird going to find water? Where is it going to find a place to rest? Some of these sort of visualization tools can help people connect to where they want to go. Because as we all know, working in any position, but especially in ag, things come up and become important. Right now, I have to deal with it today. And it's really challenging to take the time and take a step back to actually think about where overall, across all the bumps of individual days and crises, where do we want to go? And so as planners, it's our job to facilitate that time to really help people value thinking about values and vision. And so so as I mentioned here, we've got some visualization ideas. Would love to hear if other folks have ideas of how of visualizations or of other tools they've used to sort of get past the surface level of chaos and get down to what's really important to people and where they want to go. Would love to hear that from y'all. Maybe share it in the chat, or we can hang on to that for later on. All right, and then we sort of agree. It doesn't have to be what the vision and the value is going to be for the end of time, but a working value and vision that's shared by the stakeholders we find is a useful place to start. Next. Next, this is a little bit getting at a little more context, right? We've thought about the ecological, social, economic snapshot and history of the operation. What does that mean? What does that mean to people? You can have a fact and then it can mean something. So the fact that you have a well and you might lose your water rights is both a strength and potentially a weakness, right? And so like we have these facts, we have this information that we've gathered. What does it mean to people and to the operation? And so for this, we found a useful strategy is to have individuals complete this called SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Took me a really long time to figure out why there were 4 options. Internal is strengths and weaknesses, so something about the operation itself, and external opportunities and threats, so things that are coming from the outside. And so the way we facilitate that is we offer this as homework for operations, and each stakeholder completes that separately, sends it to the planner, who compiles it and de-identifies. And that addresses when you have some power dynamics, right? If you are an apprentice, they've only been on the operation for 3 months, but you have something really important to say, it might be scary to say it to people who are more experienced, who have been here longer. And so we find that this de-identified SWOT analysis, where everything goes up, everything gets equal weight to display in a shared place, can be really helpful. And that was actually something that we learned in our process of doing these pathfindings. Rather than doing it in real time, we now suggest that it's brought de-identified. Next. So we get these we get the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And together, the wheels turn, and it happens pretty naturally. The wheels turn to, man, all 5 of our stakeholders identified this as an opportunity. That might be a place that we should go. We all are sort of aligned on that. And so the next is to sort of distill all of that brainstorming into what we use SMART goals. And the SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, results-oriented, and time-bound. And I really like this as a checklist because it really helps to reality check big ideas. We want big ideas, we want implementable ideas at the same time. And so this is really challenging. I will say that producing SMART goals is incredibly challenging, but you can kind of ask and interrogate any general statement to see if it's smart. I feel like I was going to say one other thing, lost it. Hopefully I'll come back to it. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is there's also an endless list of possibilities, right? I can think of just on my dad's like 43 projects right now. How do we prioritize, right? We don't recommend making a plan with 43 goals. People are going to get frustrated, people are going to get stressed out. Having, over a 1 to 3 year time span, having 1 to 3 big goals is probably enough. And then as planners, we trust that the process that the plan partners went through with us and some of the tools that we provide them means that they're going to be able to figure out how to build in their next set of goals. We want to empower people in the process, in the plan, to keep going. Like, just because there's only 1 or 3 goals in the plan that we write doesn't mean that's the only thing they're ever going to do. We know that. We're providing this pathway for them to move forward on their own, or they can call us and ask for more help. Either way. So 1 to 3 SMART goals is where we go next. Next. So these are some examples of potential SMART goals. And let's check these. Let's see if they're truly fulfill the SMART categories. So the first one, you can maybe just give me some thumbs up if you agree. I want to build 500 compost bins in Wagon Mound, New Mexico. Is that specific? Yes. Is it measurable? Well, was it $4.99 or was it $5.01? Yes, I can definitely measure that. Is it attainable? That's a maybe, right? We don't know what resources are in this made up example. We're going to assume that whoever made the SMART goal has wood and nails and material to make compost. Okay, we're going to assume that it's attainable. Is it relevant? Here's a question. Well, folks who are not from New Mexico may not know, there's probably only 350 or so people in Wagon Mound. Do they really need 500 compost bins? That's where I'm thinking relevant may be perhaps tenuous, right? Time bound. Well, luckily I put in the next 3 years up at the top, so we know it's time bound. Right? How about the next one? I want to add cover crops. Is that specific? Given it okay. We don't know what kinds, we don't know where, right? So there's some detail that's lost, but again, if people have a frame of reference, perhaps. Is it measurable? Well, again, we don't know where, we don't know how many, we don't know where, we don't know which ones. If you add cover crops to a garden, does that count? Like, do you fulfill your goal, or do you need to do it at an acres scale, right? Is this a pilot? Is this a full-on, let's go and do this? Is it attainable? Probably so. Is it relevant? Well, if if you're not going to have water rights, maybe not. You can put seed out, and if you don't have water rights, it might not be relevant, right? Unless you pick the seed mix for knowing that, right? So, time bound in the next 3 years. Great, check. I will host 2 listening sessions for at least 20 producer participants to discuss barriers and opportunities to soil health. Pretty specific. Was there 19 people there? Or sorry, measurable. Were there 19 people there? Were there 21 people there? How many listening sessions? 2. Attainable. Again, we're going to assume that it's attainable. Relevant. Hopefully everyone in this session thinks that hearing about soil health is relevant. And time bound. Again, we're in 3 years. So those were just 3 examples. And you can see how people can argue about whether things are relevant or specific enough. And it's going to be very context dependent. But asking the questions are very helpful to getting people to really focus in on what they can do in the next 1 to 3 years. Next. All right, here's a hint. People are going to want to skip to how they're going to do things. They're going to get excited by the opportunities, and they're going to go, okay, we're going to rent a no-till drill, and then we're going to put in a diverse cover crop, and then we're going to bring in, my neighbor has goats. People are going to get excited. That's great. That's fantastic. But we want them to think about how they want the world to be, rather than thinking about what they want to do for this part of this stage, for this goal setting. We want them to be goals, not activities. So our goal should be to add cover crops. There is nothing wrong with this, of course, right? That is not, you're not doing it wrong if that's the result. We find it helpful to have these results oriented. Remember, the R of SMART was results oriented. For example, our goal is to reduce bare ground in field C by 5% by the end of 2026. The potential benefits of pushing people towards these results-oriented goals those are where you can connect the goal to the values and shared vision. In some cases, the actions are also going to be aligned with values and shared vision, but this is where we can really reality check that the stakeholders in the room are seeing the operation go in the direction that's meaningful to them, which is different than how we do it, or related, different and related than how we do it. The results focused goal can be reality checked in ways that, like, again, I'm going to add cover crops. The yes or no, I met that is more wiggly versus, man, 5% bare ground, yes or no, did we meet it or not? Right? You can kind of really get tangible, and you can be talking on the same language. The other nice thing about the reality focused goal, or the results focused goal, is that it's not prescriptive, right? There's many ways to get there rather than just one. And as we know, things come up, things go wrong, things break. We know that to be true. So if we can make our goal in a way that we can find different pathways to get there, we're not going to set people up to be like, well, the price of seed went way up and I can't afford my cover crops, so I guess I'm not going to meet my goal, right? So making it results oriented gives people what they already have, which is infinite creativity and knowledge of their own space resources. And then finally, because this is how my brain works, very practically speaking, if people are going to go for a government grant or a state grant, often the call for that grant is going to be in that results-oriented language. People want to see the goal as the result, and then they want sort of the methods separate, in a separate part of the grant. So very practically speaking, if we want these plans to be usable for going out and getting more funding, it's just a nice way to set that up, to set people up for going after their grants. Next. Now they get to brainstorm how. All right, we've gotten the vision, we've got the goal, we've poked that in a lot of different ways, and it's held up to the stakeholder discussion. Now we can think about how. All right, we've got a couple of these templates in the workbook. We want to think about, again, we want to turn the system every which way and look at it from a lot of different ways. We want it to be implementable. We want it to make sense to that individual producer. We don't want to be prescriptive. So the first thing we can look at is temporal, right? Let's see if we can get things done, if we can outline the steps to do in a timeline that makes sense. You know, we definitely shouldn't plan to have some big event happen the same month that everyone in the community does branding, right? That's not going to be implementable, because they won't have time to be working on it. So putting this temporal piece is important. Next. We want to do spatial, right? We have some suggestions of how to make maps. You can get as fancy as you want, or get a Google Earth shot or a Google Maps shot, and make sure, if you want to bring in some major equipment, that you have roads and a bridge that can support the transport of that equipment, for example, right? Let's make sure spatially that what we're planning is going to work. How things relate to each other, how to optimize the flow of farmer ranch operations, all of that is just so powerful when you take a step back and sort of think like that hummingbird. Next. And then, of course, financial. Again, there's infinite number of possibilities, and then there's reality. And so we have a couple of different worksheets for how people can assess their own finances. Again, that might be sort of overlapping with that financial context piece, but figuring out some financial goals to meet the soil health goals is probably very important and very uncomfortable for many people to think about. It is the goal to move from off-farm income to being fully supported by on-farm work. That's important to know as planners. Are there grants available that can help bridge the gap are people anticipating that there's going to be a couple of years of low productivity because we made this change? How can we find funding to offset that gap? That it's a short-term gap, but we got to offset it to get to the other side when we expect profits to start going up as a result of our interventions. So there's more to be said about the financial context piece, and what we can address that in questions, for example. Next. So together, the context gathering pathfinding is really setting us up for evaluation and adaptive management. If you were here last week, you heard me talk about how I think about teaching, which is outcomes, teaching, assessment. Really similar. We got our outcomes, right? Now we work backwards, figure out how to do it, and then how do we assess what we're doing. And so we have this the diagram of adaptive management. We are still resting right here in the plan phase. Oh, you can't see my cursor, right? Sorry. And then, after the planner is done, everything else is the producer. They're implementing, they're monitoring, they're evaluating. We as planners are trying to set them up for success and empower them to meet their goals. Great, next. And so we have a couple of tools to help people stay on track. So for example, we've got this evaluation form, and this is thinking about the actions that all of those spatially, temporally, and financially sound steps that they made in their plan. What did they actually get done in the last year? So is it being implemented and is the goal being met? Why or why not? Has progress been made? How do these activities relate to the healthy soil principles? Are we seeing changes in soil health? Just this set of questions that that can help people, again, all of those different pathways towards their ultimate goal. If they get stuck on any one of them, this sort of suite of questions may help them be able to find their way towards the goal, even if things aren't going exactly as planned, because we know they won't. But either way, I don't know about you, but man, checking something off of my to-do list is maybe the greatest reward I can ask for. And so, just imagine the planner or the plan partner a year from now goes, I got my farm track number, cross it off the list, right? There's something to that. There's this aspect of celebration and accomplishment that we want to really honor and encourage. Next. Maybe next. There we go. So this piece, so that previous one was about what actions did I do? Am I meeting my activities that we outlined? Yes or no? This one is more about the response. What is the soil telling us is happening as a result of our actions? So we set this up last time, and we talked about how with the planner, we do the baseline monitoring, and we try to empower people to be able to continue their monitoring on their own subsequently. So if you, the planner, hand over the document, this year 0 might be filled in, and then they can go back, repeat what you did year after year. And again, we split this up by the management activities, seeing if the activities are aligning with the healthy soil principles. So maybe in year 0, they had only, if they were doing some range monitoring, they only had 2 functional groups. They had annual grasses and they had annual forbs, right? That would be in the baseline. And then by year 3, they have perennial grasses and annual grasses and native grasses. That means that they've increased biodiversity that aligns with healthy soil principles. So it can help them see how their activities are tying back into what the soil is actually processing and doing. Next. And then again, this should look familiar from last time. Also, whatever in-field tests or even lab assessments that are important to the producer, those can be tracked through time as well. And we put on here yearly assessments. It's a good idea to do things about the same time every year. But of course, it's going to vary on what the interests are. If someone's really interested in bulk density, that's probably going to take quite a long time to see a meaningful change. So this, monitoring every year framework might not be appropriate. So of course, planners have to use their own knowledge and the interests of the planner to refine any of these evaluation frameworks. But this is a starting point for trying to align what's happening with the healthy soil principles. Great. Next. And with that, I will turn it back. I'm like, oh, and then we're done. I'll turn it back over to Catherine to introduce our guest. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eva. I always learn so much from all of our plan partners, and this process that we're talking about today. I'm privileged to be able to participate as a facilitator and truly a partner with our farmers and ranchers. And this first slide is just what I'm going to be introducing is this is our earthworm count on the baseline soil share day that you heard about baseline soil shares last week. And this was in October this last year at Red Willow Center that is on the Taos Pueblo. And we, as part of their youth education program, my cohort that you met last week, Amy, came up with a monitoring plan that could be used with that program. And we love counting earthworms. Next slide. And also, this is a really well organized production space. There's covered greenhouses and cold frames with crops in between. Next slide. And these were some of the pictures from the site assessments. There's a really nice pick and pack area that's covered, and it's just a very well organized, well established vegetable farm on several acres. In next slide. And I saw they had on-farm compost making. They were using interplantings, pollinator crops, and producing, my first site visit there was in September last year, and they were producing 600 to 800 pounds of food a week, which was being distributed both through a farmer's market, CSA, and RX Fresh boxes, as well as taking overflow vegetables to a startup farmer's market across town. So I asked Shannon Seegers, and you can go next slide, the youth education coordinator at the Red Willow Center, and that works with Tiana, who's the executive director that couldn't be with us here today, to come with us today because it was our largest. As you can see on this slide, we have it was the largest group that we had as a team. So we had like 8 people from the Red Willow Center participate in the Pathfinder's Day, which is our goal setting day. And we also, we used some different tactics with the larger team on the SWOT analysis, where we cut the papers up and divided them in piles, and then had teams of 2 report on each of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It was really important to always, one of the things we used was we would have people separate the pairs, separate out like their stack of strengths, separate them out into themes, and then report them back to us, like how many pieces of paper did you have for, this particular theme. And that's how we took the top couple of categories of strengths with such a large group. So we also always, we're happy to see it's when we talk about weaknesses or threats with groups of farm teams and ranch teams, it's really nice if there's no surprises, and usually there's not. It's really nice way to sync up a team in terms of letting people feel heard, and also kind of creating this common understanding of where the operation stands at that time. We use, right after the SWOT, we use the ecological context piece, which is talked about in the advanced copy of the Planning for Soil Health workbook that you have access to bring in the ecological context on a kind of a larger basis in terms of temperatures, precipitations, vegetative cover trends, some of these kind of larger analysis. And then we kind of bring it back in during Pathfinder's Day. This is 8 people in a room with flip chart papers up on the walls and pieces like that. We bring it back to soil health a lot of times by asking people, if you're moving towards the SMART goals, one of the little tips is we'll say, hey, let's talk about what practices you're doing right now that do align with soil health principles. Because at this point, after the site assessment and the baseline soil share and the phone calls and everything, there's a nice list on every single operation that we've been on. And then we go from what you are doing as practices to making it naturally flows to what do you think the next steps are? And that's kind of the way we get people to give us those initial next steps or soil health goals that we then take the time to turn into SMART goals. And then they'll go into that action, those action items and calendared work plans that Eva went over. And so I was really fortunate today to introduce, like I said, Shannon Seeger, the Youth and Education Director, and from the Red Willow Center, to share with us a little bit about what this process was like for them. They have a lot of people to manage. They have a lot of food that they're growing for their community, and they have a lot of different activities that they associate with the center in terms of education and outreach and nutrition. So I'm sure you're out there. I'll have my tech support, Janet, get us into Shannon being available here to speak to us. There she is. Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you for sharing some time with us today. And I'm excited that you could be with us because I know you're getting cranked up again for the next season. It's that time of year already. So Shannon, add any words you want to about what Red Willow Center is for you guys, for you.
Yeah, so the Red Willow Center is a nonprofit farm located on the Taos Pueblo. So its primary purpose is to serve the Taos Pueblo community. We have a mission statement, which is cool, just you talking about that in the beginning, because I think it does help us to hone and focus, like, what are we really trying to do here? But the mission of the farm is to reclaim the agricultural heritage of Taos Pueblo and restore its traditional food systems. So though we did produce a lot of food this year, we aren't primarily a production farm. Our primary goal is education for the community and community connection. But I think one of the best ways to reinvigorate that is to not just, have a cute farm, but a farm that you can see like really can produce a lot of food on a small scale. This year, we have, I think, about 2 acres of growing space, maybe a little bit less, but this year we were growing all that food only on about 1/3 of an acre. So the farm itself has been around for about 20 years and has been through a number of different directors and different iterations of kind of what they're focusing on. And I've been there as the youth coordinator and farm manager for the past two years. So this is going into the third season that I'll be there. And the executive director that's there, Tiana, she's been there. This will be her fourth season. So kind of since then, there's been a bit of a shift. And you saw those greenhouses that Catherine pulled up, and we actually didn't grow in those at all this past year. There's 3 of them, and 2 of them are heated by a massive, it's called the Garn system, and it's a giant wood fire essentially that pumps. Anyways, there's logistics that are really fun and interesting, but a fire heats the greenhouses, but we didn't heat them or grow in them last year at all, because over the past 20 years, they've just been grown in repeatedly, even through the winters, because they're able to be heated. They haven't had any rest, and there really hasn't been any sort of soil rejuvenation happening. So 2 summers ago, we were kind of playing with the idea, like, could we, do enough outside without using the greenhouses and produce, what we're hoping to. And we were just kind of like, let's go for it. So we shut those down, and simultaneously had the Healthy Soils grant that has been mentioned a few times. And so we are able to shut those down, bring in a lot of compost and cover crops and those kind of things, and just let the greenhouses rest while we really focused on our field production. I'm not sure if I'm getting off topic a little bit.
Well, I think what I'm hearing, and what I was really aware of when I first started working with you and your team, is you already have a planning process. You already are getting grants. You already have a large team. You're producing a lot of food. So I'm curious, like going through the planning for soil health process and getting to that Pathfinder day, when we had that room full of people in the education center there. How was that different from previous years' plan?
Yeah, so in previous years, and Catherine knows this, but we didn't have as large of a team. So last year it was just me over the winter. We didn't have any staff at that point. We had interns that had been with us, but they were all off at school. So the planning was just me sitting and like putting things on an Excel spreadsheet, shifting it around. And I would show it to Tiana, and she'd just kind of be like, great, sounds good. So there wasn't a lot of, kind of hashing out, like, is this really what we want? Or, it's just kind of me thinking and then trying it. And so then this past season, we didn't have staff members until about May is when we started. And throughout the season, we had a lot of turnover, and then we'd get some new people. Some people would leave. And that's probably something that a lot of people experience as well. Just, it's hard to get staff to stick. And so the Pathfinder's Day, the fact that we had 8 people there was like kind of a really cool culmination of the season, because even on a given day, we typically didn't have that many people, because we have such flux and a bit of flexibility with staff members. So sitting down and discussing all these healthy soil principles with the whole group was something that we hadn't really had an opportunity to do. Like, we would talk about it, kind of on a day-to-day basis, like we're flipping a bed. Okay, like we're not, we're using a broad fork, and we're trying not to disturb the soil as much as possible. And we could talk about these things in the moment, but having it kind of as a big group thing was different for sure. And I think I think it helps people like buy into like this kind of vision of healthy soils more so, because they're seeing the whole picture rather than just like what we're doing to this specific bed or this specific greenhouse. And so even though, like Catherine said, we kind of are in the process of planning these things already, the goals that we wrote down, for me, like they help to kind of just like ground and focus me and say like, okay, these are the 2 things that are going to be most important to us this year. But I think it also helps with the buy-in from the staff. Whether or not we end up having those staff this year is a different question. That's still kind of as to be seen. But for me that day, I think it gave me more energy to keep planning rather than just kind of going back into that space that I had been in of like, well, this is just something I do, and then present it to everyone. So it gave me more energy to be more thorough in what I put down on paper, because a lot of times it's just in my head. And so I'm really trying this winter to make things readable for other people so that I can share what I've been planning. And maybe we'll even print it out bigger, because I think that day just showed me the value of like really bringing people into like the whole picture rather than specific tasks. So
That's good. When we went through the process that day, one of your stated goals at the very beginning was team skill building, education, and capacity building. Do you feel like there were some team skills that you could use again for another meeting that we used that day in the facilitation for Pathfinder's Day?
That's a good question. Well, I think like the SWOT analysis is something that we could do again, periodically throughout the season in a more casual way. I think it was valuable to have everyone's like, I feel like the strengths, everyone's like, pretty keen to put those out there. And it was cool to see like how on the same page we were. We all saw the same positive things. And then when we put the weaknesses out, people were a little bit more hesitant, but then started kind of getting rolling as they were hearing other people say, oh, this is something like we really need farm truck insurance. And then people are like, oh yeah, and we need new tires. And so like, as far as doing it ahead of time, to, de-identify things, I think that could have been valuable for the reasons Catherine said, but doing it in person, I think also brought more out. So yeah, doing SWOT analysis along the way, I think could be helpful, just to keep everyone kind of united in a way. That to me felt like the most valuable part, not even identifying those things so much, because I think it was things we all knew, but it, I think, created a more of a sense of unity almost.
I'm glad you touched on the piece. We are in an open learning system, and working with your team. I mean, I learn every day working with you all too, and taking the time to get, if we're gonna, when we include everybody, to have the worksheet homework printed and available ahead of time, a couple of weeks in certain cases. You'll know your team planners when you're out there working, so that you can get the homework back and type it up and kind of de-identify it is an important part working with groups. And your team helped us give us feedback and learn that better. I appreciate you touching on that. You mentioned that one of the most valuable things was this, it sounded almost like a feeling that the team got. I remember when you guys left for lunch that day, it felt like you were celebrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a really nice moment of culmination, because let's see, was it in December, first week of December we did this?
Yep,
I think
it was December 1st.
Yeah, so we finished our like major farm production end of October, last week of October, and then November was pretty much just like wrapping up and shutting the farm down, preparing it for winter. And we started, it seemed like kind of last minute with Quivira working on this program. So we kind of got our sessions in quickly, and then we still had this last Pathfinders to do, and the end of the season just creeped up quickly. So we had really been kind of wrapping up and shutting down, and to have a day where everyone just kind of came and sat together. Like, I don't know if we would have got people to do that as easily if it hadn't been this kind of, more formal thing that's like, oh, you're expected to be here, and there'll be snacks. and so it was like a really like dear moment where everyone was just like really expressing how proud they were of the work that they'd done over the season, and affirming everyone else's work that like they had seen them put in over the season, and like more so than the planning. I think like that was something that was just like, I think, really gratifying for a lot of the people who were there that day. It was for me, for sure.
I really appreciate you sharing that. It's difficult to quantify sometimes the difference between all of these planning pieces, which are really important, and we're getting a lot out of that. And then kind of the people pieces, you know, of it is people, and it's people working together on projects and on land. And I really am a firm believer that the celebratory moments just need to be recognized and allowed to happen, to bring it. It's a sign of right relationship, to me, for your team. And it was so beautiful to see that. I do want to comment quickly on the time frame since you brought it up. We did our first site visit with you and your team on September 23rd. The baseline soil share was about a month later on October 21st. And then the Pathfinder's Day was December 1st. So I'm saying that too for these other planners out there on this call, is that you could really customize this time frame to whatever best fits your circumstances. And also, lastly, that it's nice to have that meeting at the end of a growing season. I think that's a really great timing for most operations at the end of their harvest, whatever that is. Give people a couple weeks to recover from that, and then have some type of regroup around this. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Shanna? We so appreciate your time today.
Yeah. The last thing that's just on my mind was my appreciation of Quivira being there, and Catherine. The way we ended up with them as plan partners was Catherine just showed up to our farm one day to the farmers market and was kind of like, we have this opportunity. Like, do you want to apply? And I was just like, okay, we'll apply. And I appreciate Catherine's kind of forwardness in coming to meet us, because just being sectioned off on the Pueblo, sometimes it's a bubble that you have a hard time seeing out of, because we're just kind of doing our own little thing. So I was really appreciative of Catherine doing that, and the staff really appreciated the days that we had learning about the soil and just touring Catherine around and telling her about all the work they've been doing. So I think all of it was like really nice moments for the staff to kind of, share the work that they've put in over the season. And then for me, just the accountability that it provides, being a plan partner, has been helpful as well. Like I was saying, I can just kind of keep things in my head, but because I have Catherine, I'm kind of like, oh, I might need to like explain or show someone, what I've kind of been planning. That pushed me to say, like, I should be more detailed for the sake of my staff. Just kind of feeling like I have Catherine back there being like, hey, what's going on? So yeah, just wanted to say that I appreciate you guys and your engagement with us and the accountability. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here with us and for sharing how things, and we're looking forward to seeing your garden grow.
Thanks so much. I think we take a quick break, stretch, grab some water. I think Janet will be pulling up some cute emoji here in a second. And then we'll come right back, and people can, you have time to digest and ask some questions. And then, like we said, we can practice some of these skills together. So, just a minute. All righty. Like we said, that was a quick break. Come on back. We will check the chat. I think there were some comments or questions in chat, but feel free to come off mute and feel free to share something that worked, some questions that you had. Oh, I skipped something, didn't I? Thank you, Janet. Janet is always there. All right. So we like to give the big picture. We like to give an example of how it worked. And here's a couple of tips that you can take with you, put them in your toolbox. And unprompted, these guys already hit on a couple of these. Then we'll get to having conversations and asking questions. All right, some facilitation strategies are bring physical copies of useful documents. There's a couple of reasons. English as second language folks often find it's easier to read along rather than only listen. So I find that as a really compelling reason to always have words rather than only pictures, having a combination. Make sure that there's space for taking notes and gathering their thoughts. And that's connecting these new ideas back to what they already know. So having time and space to really ground the new things that are bubbling up. A lot of people find it useful to process and diagram and write things down. But yeah, and sort of Catherine just demonstrated having notes from previous sessions, at the drop of the hat. Catherine knew when we were where in different parts of the process. That can be really helpful for, it can just be helpful for so many reasons. So bringing those different physical copies that everyone can look at together. We mentioned in the very first session that the working agreements are really important. Acknowledging power dynamics, we mentioned this before. Although I loved, Shannon, your comment that it can be powerful to do it in real time also. So I think this, as usual, tells us that being prescriptive is probably not the right way to go, and adjust and be dynamic with the people you're actually working with. So thank you again. Next. And great. And so we like to have pretty generative and open brainstorming ideas. And I think we sort of we can recognize when there's someone who comes with a really strong preconceived notion that it can be hard for others to bring their voice in. And so it can be helpful to start with a blank slate and fill that in together. So for example, have a large sheet of paper and everybody gets a sticky note to write their responses on. So that's keeping it from having something on paper that then everybody's trying to fit into, rather than creating something from the collective brainstorming and ideas. And then tip 4, visualizations or artistic expressions, which is something we mentioned right at the very beginning. And we have a couple of ideas, and as I mentioned, would love to hear more. I do know that in one pathfinding day, there were hand puppets, right? And that worked for that team in that moment, and that, right? And it's and that's what we as planners do. Me being an honorary planner, we go with people. We meet people where they're at, and that's and finding some out of the box ways to do it, it can be welcome.